For this video, I traveled to the absolutely gorgeous Monterey, California to find out why so many people say it has the best aquarium in America. The world-famous Monterey Bay Aquarium has been revolutionizing marine husbandry, research, and expanding conservation efforts since 1984, like campaigning to ban the shark fin trade in California, organizing a strong commitment to sustainable seafood, successfully caring for and releasing great white sharks, and so much more that you'll learn along the way. For our 3-part tour, you'll see the best of their 770 plants and animals from the waters that are right outside the window, the open ocean, and a world unlike any other. I did not have the pleasure of staying in the city, but to get here I drove 2 hours from San Francisco. Like a lot of aquariums, they don't have their own parking, so I settled for the Cannery Row public parking garage that's just a 7-minute walk away. Aquariums are also known for being a bit on the pricey side, and Monterey is no exception. But believe me, no matter what you spend, it is worth it. We'll be taking a left into the ocean's edge and the coastal habitat of Monterey Bay. The first main hallway starts you off kind of small. It's made up of 4 different zones: deep reef, sandy floor, shale reef, and the wharf, displaying mostly overlooked species that can be found just outside the aquarium, even though a lot of what you'll find is so small that some of them need to be magnified. This hallway makes up the largest collection in the entire aquarium with nearly 100 species. The entire way you're able to follow along a 90-foot long, 312,000-gallon hourglass-shaped tank. This shape gives the sharks room to glide and turn, which helps them get rid of metabolic waste in muscle tissue. You'll find striped sea bass, leopard sharks, white sturgeons, giant sea bass, a top predator that can weigh 550 pounds. But what you want to look out for though is something found in very few aquariums: the broad-nosed 7-gill shark, one of 2 sharks with 7 gills on either side of their body. Most have 5, and they only have 1 dorsal fin, while most sharks have 2. Its upper teeth are jagged, its lower teeth are comb-shaped, perfect for tearing flesh off of an octopus, dead animals, and they've even been observed hunting seals in packs. The very end of this gallery is where I learned how much this aquarium values education and conservation. To further promote the importance of sustainable seafood, they installed the Real Cost Cafe, a fake but still interactive diner. Just click on one of the fish listed on the menu, and 3 virtual chefs and your check will give reasons as to whether or not it's okay to order certain seafood, because it may or may not be ethically farmed or caught. But we'll learn more about this in part 2. The second gallery in Ocean's Edge is the Rocky Shore, opening up with hermit crabs, pipefish, and another virtual expert talking about the importance of wetlands. But everyone flocks to this walk-through aviary. When you think birds in an aquarium, you might think penguins and puffins. Monterey has those, but also gives sanctuary to overlooked and underappreciated shorebirds from the beaches and dunes, and you can get really close to them. This corner blends life from the land and the sea, mixing oyster catchers with rays and sharks. It's not a touch tank, by the way, at least not yet. Also, if you don't feel like crouching down to see underwater, you can move and pinpoint this periscope. In recent years, you'd find 10 different kinds of shorebirds in the main exhibit. Almost all of them came from other wildlife rescue stations across the country after being injured or abandoned before they even hatched, and some are rehabilitated and released into the wild. To keep the birds busy, keepers hide insects in the sand so they can hunt just like they would in the wild. And some days the staff will open the windows so you can all feel the breeze. And to look like an actual shoreline, it's supposed to blend with the bay in the background, but on the inside, the dune slopes into a saltwater shallow. The birds on this side don't live with sharks, but they're still definitely not alone. The rest of the Rocky Shore is the most hands-on part of the aquarium, a bat ray touch tank that looks like it connects to the oyster catchers, which by the way are much easier to see outside of the aviary. There's a touch pool filled with kelp and smaller creatures, a wheel feature where if you spin it, barnacles will come out to feed. But you're going to want to get a good spot in this walk-through tunnel, where timing is everything. The Wave Crash Gallery drops 600 gallons of water every minute into an all-outdoor display. Not only is this a thrilling feature, but it was made to teach visitors about high and low tides, which perfectly matches the theme of the Great Tide Pool. The water that circulates from the bay that goes into the aquarium is then emptied into this partially man-made reservoir. Not only is wildlife welcome to use it, but the aquarium has used it to rehabilitate pelicans, seals, and 2 fictional humpback whales in Star Trek 4, but even you can swim in it if you sign up for the Underwater Explorers Scuba Experience. When you're out here, you can really get a better look and see how Pixar was inspired when they were designing the Marine Life Institute and Finding Dory. Now, speaking of humpback whales, it may look like a whole bunch of nothing in the bay, but depending on the season, you might see glimpses of common and Rizzo's dolphins, several kinds of whales, and even orcas. If you think you don't see anything, you might need the binoculars, but you should always be able to see pinnipeds and a large raft of sea otters. The majority of them will stay way out there and float on the surface in a group, but a few stragglers might come even closer to the aquarium, like the one I spotted just outside the window when I was eating lunch. The viewing deck also has a second outdoor tank, this time filled with loads and loads of trout, turtles, and living plants. And if you were to follow it, it'll take you back inside and lead you to the aquarium's crown jewel. This is the famous kelp forest, 343,000 gallons, 65 feet wide, 28 feet tall, making it one of the tallest aquarium exhibits in the world. Kelp forests are very important to the California coast's ecosystem. They're like tropical rainforests in terms of its biodiversity and how they provide shelter for hundreds of animals. Before becoming an opening day attraction, no aquarium was able to maintain a living kelp forest in an artificial setting. So how'd they do it? They allow the forest to grow in direct sunlight. 2,000 gallons of water from the bay is pumped into the tank every minute, and every 6 seconds, a surge machine replicates the currents of California's waters. This process helps the kelp grow an average of 4 inches a day and gives this display its iconic look. Including the kelp, about 20 species call this home, but the most popular creature that you'll find in this area doesn't live in the tank. In fact, they don't even live underwater at all. On select days around 1:30, the keepers will bring out Makana, a Laysan albatross. Laysans are on the smaller side, but in general, albatrosses are the world's largest seabirds. In the wild, they are known for traveling thousands and thousands of miles without even touching land. It would only take them around 2 months to fly around the world. Makana, though, is here because she sustained an injury to her wing, therefore wouldn't be able to survive in the wild. The Monterey Bay Aquarium claims to be the only institution in North America that cares for an albatross. So this encounter might be your only opportunity of ever seeing one. And based on the crowd, it was nice to see that people apparently got that message. The kelp forest can be admired from 3 different stories, including one that's above deck. The second story continues this kelp mania in the enchanted kelp forest. There's kelp growing in a cylindrical tank, another kelp touch pool, seaweed gardens, and you've heard of shark tunnels, but you've probably never seen a tunnel filled with, you guessed it, more kelp. The splash zone is essentially a children's zoo. The Coral Kingdom draws in both adults and children with vibrant displays. There's a playground and interactive water features, leaping blennies, but everyone knows the extra fun is by and from the penguins. Though they don't have an outdoor display, the aquarium says the cold currents of their native South Africa are similar to Monterey Bay's. To stay warm, African penguins have a double layer of insulation with densely packed feathers. They face the opposite problem on land and try to avoid overheating. They'll resort to panting and pump blood to certain parts of the body that are less insulated. I read this exhibit was meant to be temporary, and there are talks of either an expansion or plans to improve this habitat. Next to that is an above-surface view of the 7-gill shark tank and close encounters with California morays, and we are off to the last gallery of the day. Compared to other world-famous American aquariums, Monterey's collection lacks mammals. Since none of the exhibits were designed to house larger mammals like whales and dolphins, they sort of use that kind of wildlife that you can find outside as a quote-unquote exhibit. They do have one furry friend, and it's possibly the best marine mammal you could ask to see. Ladies and gents, the southern sea otter. The first floor windows give an underwater view of their acrobatics in 55,000 gallons. The second floor, you can watch them at the surface. Just like every sea otter habitat we've come across so far, but all of those other ones are really bare and uninspiring. This one is alive. The kelp might not be real, I think, but there's growth on the rockwork. If I never saw this and you told me Garibaldis were mixed with otters, I don't think I'd believe you. On top of that, after looking around, I feel like I'm an expert on sea otters now. Everything you need to learn about them is right here. About their diet, why they don't need fresh water, why they're threatened in the wild, how a mom cares for her pup, how the aquarium cares for pups, and you can even compare and contrast the thickness and texture of their fur to a muskrat's and synthetic fur. Since year one in 1984, Monterey has been rehabbing and releasing injured and orphaned sea otters. I found one source that claims back then, staff would swim with rescued otter pups in the Great Tide Pool, teaching them to swim and hunt. In 2001, they became the first place to use sea otter surrogates. A few of those females that are deemed unreleasable will act as surrogate mothers to rescued pups, so they can show them what it takes to survive in the wild. From 2002 to 2016, 37 surrogate reared pups graduated from this program and were released into the Monterey Bay. We are moving from the ocean's edge wing into the open sea that was added in 1996. If you follow the pod of Pacific white-sided dolphins, they are your guides into something you will never forget. The entrance to the open sea gallery is a roundabout of 7,000 Pacific sardines, moving in an endless circle right above you. They're moving along a 2-knot current, influencing their swim speed to be around 2.5 miles per hour. But when they get hungry, some of them will go against the current and open their mouth so it's easier to eat. The sardine is a very important part of the ecosystem and an important part of the aquarium's history, and you'll find out why later in this video. It's really not easy to leave this view, but when you do, you'll find yourself in the Out to Sea gallery, surrounded by drifters. You just had to say goodbye to sardines for now, but this actually begins with a very similar fish. These are Pacific mackerel, who are also moving in a continuous circle, but this time you can get so much closer and study the details of each fish, and half of their swim path goes off screen. The rest of the gallery is jam-packed with floating brainless beauties. Jellies are a staple, a must-have no matter how big or small an aquarium is. In the Monterey Bay Aquarium's 40 years, they've had 3 separate exhibits dedicated solely to jellies. At one point, they had the largest collection in the country. In the mid-90s, they designed new tanks and used new husbandry techniques that were so innovative for their time. The aquarium claims partial responsibility for launching the jellyfish exhibit boom in the United States. Even though the displays are standard to us now because we've seen something like this before and we will again. But overall, I don't think any aquarium in the US does this quite like the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Almost everything on the building's left side represents the Monterey Bay's coast, but the open sea's signature display brings the depths of pelagic waters right to you. A vast blue world found 60 miles offshore, spanning 90 feet across, 52 feet from the glass to the seemingly endless back. It's 35 feet tall and viewable from a separate gallery that's right below this. The main window itself is 54 feet long and 15 feet tall. When it was installed, it was promoted as the largest aquarium window in the world. You're looking at 1.2 million gallons, half of the aquarium's total water volume, and by far its largest exhibit. Even if you've never been here, I'm sure that many of you know this tank is famous, not exactly for what it is, but for what's lived in it. Every now and then you might catch an ocean sunfish or the mola mola, one of the heaviest bony fishes in the world. They average out around 6 feet long, 8 feet from fin to fin, and 2,000 pounds, although they can get way heavier than that. Even though I missed them, at least one is usually on display for several months at a time. If the aquarium feels they're getting too big for the tank or not feeling their best, they'll be tagged and released as soon as possible. Now, out of everything this place does, they're probably most famous for hosting great white sharks, one of the ocean's most admired and feared predators. Monterey did their first attempt in 1984. Since the shark wouldn't eat, the experiment only lasted 11 days. They tried again 20 years later. This time, the great white not only ate, but grew and thrived for 6.5 months before being released. The previous world record for displaying one was 16 days. Up until 2011, Monterey successfully exhibited 6 white sharks, becoming the only aquarium ever to exhibit, feed, tag, and return great whites to the wild. Since these accomplishments were conducted for research only, and because the aquarium learned everything they wanted to know, they said they will not be displaying any more great white sharks. Right now, you'd find a critically endangered hammerhead shark, pelagic stingrays, rescued green sea turtles that are given regular outdoor access. They may not have dolphins here, but they do have dolphin fish, also known as dorado, but you might know them best as mahi-mahi. And it's claimed this is the only aquarium in the US with yellowfin tuna, fish that's proven really difficult to care for sometimes. They established the Tuna Research and Conservation Center that tags and studies tuna in the wild, and the school that you're seeing right now. But it was almost impossible to look away from, once again, the sardines, twisting and turning in a hypnotizing swirl. This synchronization makes it easier to find food since they have so many eyes on the lookout. It also increases the odds of reproducing, and when you put thousands of identical fish together, it can be confusing and intimidating to a predator. All of this was built on the site of a defunct sardine cannery. Business was booming in the early 1900s. By the 50s and 60s, the sardines were overfished and the local industry collapsed. And that part of history is one reason why the aquarium launched the Seafood Watch program that encourages consumers to get their seafood from fisheries that catch or farm without permanently damaging the ecosystem. If you can't get your hands on this pocket guide, just go to seafoodwatch.org. Type just about any famous fish you can think of, and the site will tell you where it's okay to buy the fish from and where and why it's not okay. For another example, US wild-caught anchovies are considered a smart seafood choice because they are sustainably managed and harvested under strict regulations. The aquarium's research and conservation continues with pelagic red crabs. Scientists from the aquarium conducted a study on microplastic pollution in the bay, and they found these plastics in these red crabs. As one of the most abundant small creatures in the California current, these are a very important food source for otters, tuna, whales, and seabirds. This pollution theme ties in with the common murre and tufted puffin display. When they skydive into the water, they can be on the hunt for 20 to 30 seconds, catching and holding as many as 10 fish in one trip. But with tons of trash moving along the ocean's currents, like a sea turtle does to a plastic bag, a sea bird might confuse a shiny piece of plastic with a fish and risk illness and starvation. Seeing things for yourself is believing. So if that doesn't leave an impact on you, then I recommend walking to the window, get a good look of the ocean, and then come back and walk through the Art for the Environment exhibition that displays works by international artists that uses discarded items, some found in the ocean, and turns them into sculptures with inspiring messages. And I gotta tell you, I've seen a lot of places do this, but again, no one does it better than the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Our last stop appropriately looks like it's in a basement. Some like to say that Into the Deep was decades in the making. The aquarium and its sister institution created a small-scale deep-sea gallery in 1999 that focused on the Twilight Zone, similar to the one at the California Academy of Sciences. Because the attraction was so successful, they worked even harder to find out how to care for species that live even deeper than the Twilight Zone. And by 2022, they unveiled North America's largest deep-sea exhibit. The first section introduces you to the MBARI team that helped make this gallery possible. This is a topographic model that reveals a lot of their studies took place in the underwater Monterey Canyon that twists and turns almost 300 miles offshore. It's 7 miles wide and reaches 2.5 miles at its deepest point, making it the largest submarine canyon along North America's coast. Into the Deep is also connected to the 1.2 million gallon open sea that we marveled at in part 2. It's supposed to show that tuna and sharks are willing to dive really deep to find food, but also having this lower level makes it seem like you've just journeyed from the surface of the open sea and descended into the deep. Most of the creatures that we're about to see were never displayed before, including the bloody belly comb jelly, first scientifically described in the early 2000s at the aquarium's own research center. These blood bellies were one of the first species the aquarium used to discover how to care for deep-sea creatures by creating very oxygen-poor tanks. What's ironic is they're practically invisible in the deep sea. because the red wavelength on the light spectrum does not reach the ocean depths. Much like the lobed comb jelly, they are able to weakly propel themselves through the water using these rows of pulsing microscopic hair-like structures called cilia. Mauve stingers are an unusual jellyfish because both their tentacles and bell are covered in stinging cells. Crown jellies can use bioluminescence to lure their prey or scare off attackers. Abyssal comb jellies are found in the northeastern Pacific from the surface to a depth of 9,000 feet. They patrol the midnight zone on the hunt for other comb jellies. They also have cilia in its mouth that act like teeth, but a lot of their other prey produces bioluminescence, which should give them a glowing gut and make them a target for other predators. Fortunately, this crimson color can absorb this light and keep this abyssal jelly camouflaged. Like so many deep-sea beauties, common siphonophores look like something you'd find under a microscope. As rare as they may seem, there's 175 recognized species in the siphonophore order. The one that you may be familiar with is the Portuguese man-o'-war, which is often mistaken for a jellyfish. Every siphonophore is actually a colony of individual parts called zooids. In other words, an organism made up of other connected organisms linked together to move as one, and scientists describe them as deadly beauties. To trap their prey, they'll cast a net of retractable tentacles, looking for plankton and krill. In fact, common siphonophores often eat more krill in the bay than whales do. As you might expect, one of the gallery's greatest features is education. From showing you how spookfish move their eyes, to immersing you in a room of pulsing bioluminescent light, to a game called Eat or Be Eaten, where you become a deep-sea creature and it's your job to survive in this harsh environment. That brings us from the midwater to the seafloor. There wasn't as much floating going around for me to get better looks, and I was really hoping to get any kind of movement from the hagfish, but at least the creatures in the diorama were kind enough to be out in the open and stay still. The display starts off in darkness and is only lit up when the projection of a research institute rover appears, revealing a small interpretation of life on the muddy plains filled with life-sized models. Some of these species may not be on display, but are still being studied by the aquarium in the wild. Seamounts for underwater mountains support an array of invertebrates, fishes, and in this case the world's most diverse display of deep-sea corals. A lot of seamounts are remnants of old and actively growing volcanoes, and that volcanic activity creates a scattered oasis of hot hydrothermal vents, belching water that can reach 700 degrees Fahrenheit, but at the same time, it shoots nutrient-rich chemicals, minerals, and bacteria that supports a diverse community of organisms. Into the Deep's largest display shows that one animal's passing can spring new life. A whale fall is a term for a temporary ecosystem when a massive whale passes and sinks to the bottom of the ocean. It's not exactly something we want to hear, but it also provides an abundant amount of nutrients for up to 50 to even 100 years for hundreds of seafloor creatures. This is just a mold of a sperm whale, but I came across one source stating the aquarium is permitted to attach cameras to a real whale carcass, sink it, and allow visitors to watch the decomposition. The artificial whale is guarded by Japanese spider crabs, arguably the most famous deep-sea resident when it comes to aquariums, so I expected to see them, but I got a good jump scare from the Australian ghost shark. They are not sharks, but it's believed they genetically diverged from them 400 million years ago. The Into the Deep exhibit is teeming with newly discovered life of which we know very little about, but not exactly with ghost sharks. They're often caught recreationally and commercially off southern Australia and New Zealand, and are sold as silver trumpeter, whitefish, and the more popular fish and chips. Another enjoyer of fallen debris is the giant isopod, a cousin of the crab and what you might know as roly-polies. 10,000 isopod species are out there. At 16 inches from head to tail, this is the largest of them all. And I know what you're thinking, yes, the aquarium will let you pet one, free of charge. And that, my fellow zoo and travel enthusiasts, is where we will end our jaw-dropping, inspiring ocean exploration through the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Of all my travels, of the 50 other zoos, aquariums, safari parks I've been to, none of them have even come close to making me feel connected to nature as much as the Monterey Bay Aquarium does. If you're looking for an attraction that was designed to wow its visitors while expressing the value of conservation, you need to put this place at the top of your must-see list. If this isn't the best all-around aquarium in America, then it's at least the most educational. Even though this is our last tour for now, I'm not necessarily saying farewell. The scientists here are constantly innovating, so you never know what incredible record-breaking project they'll create next. So until next time, please stay tuned, stay wild, and thank you all for joining me at the Monterey Bay Aquarium.